Hi, everyone. Welcome to Startup Conversations by Lab Launch. Lab Launch is a provider of lab space for life sciences startups in the LA region. And my name is Marie Rippin. I am the COO. We are joined today by Dina Lazovsky, our guest from UCLA Tech Development Group, and she has been deeply involved in Southern California biotech. And we're really excited to hear from her about some of the essentials for dealing with academic tech transfer. So Dina, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. Thank you, Marie. And also thank you for inviting me. I really like talking about this topic because I know that tech transfer can be opaque. And part of the reason that it's opaque, I'll get to introducing myself in a second. I just wanted to say this first. Part of the reason that it's opaque is because it's such a complex set of issues that all sound like one thing. And there are times that even people who are trying to help you seem like they're adversarial, and they're not. We're all trying to do the right thing and get technologies out of a university and into the market. But back to me. So Marie warned me that she was going to ask me to talk a little bit about myself, which I don't really like doing, but I realized that I've been doing IP licensing since 1996 or 7, and that just made me feel sad and old. So but tech transfer I've been doing since 1998 when I joined USC's Office of Technology Licensing at the time. It's now USC Stevens. And I've done so much of this sort of from all sides of the table. So I've worked at UCLA, USC, and UCSB licensing technologies out. I've worked for large companies and small companies licensing in. I've been at a startup. I helped tech scout for a company. And so I've worked with investing a little bit as well. So I like to say that I've seen this business sort of from all sides of the table, which I think has helped me have empathy and sympathy for anyone who's trying to sort of work with IP. And that's the long, short, medium sized background. Anything else I should tell you about me, Marie?
I think that's good for now. I think if
okay,
others come up, then great. But I want to jump in, with kind of the first important question that we get. And honestly, it's a question that I think we don't get enough from, really early stage academic, inventors. And that is, if I'm, say a postdoc or a grad student in a lab or even faculty, who owns my IP? And how exactly do I go about figuring that out?
That is a great place to start. And I think that that's another one of those places where we all try to be very obvious in tech transfer about who owns it, but there are always nuances. So in general, each university, each research hospital has some sort of policy that governs ownership of intellectual property that's developed there. And the easy part is, if you're using facilities, if you're using resources, if you're using any kind of funding that's coming through the institution where you're doing your research, that institution, that university owns the IP that you develop. The part that becomes more nuanced is whether or not it's within your employment. And different universities, different research hospitals, they define that very differently. There's a very broad spectrum, all the way from someone like Stanford, which basically looks at it geographically. Did you do it on campus or did you do it somewhere else? All the way to the University of California, which says anything that you could have done as part of your job, and this is an oversimplification, belongs to the university. And so really what you want to do is first find the policy so that you understand it. Most tech transfer offices have explanatory Q&A, some sort of information, and then just go ahead and go to the tech transfer office and chat with them about it. I've always told people when I'm working at a university, if we don't think the university owns it, we don't want to own it. It's yours. Please go do what you want to with it. But if it does belong to the university, we have to do the right thing for them.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that clears things up just by saying that, well, it depends.
Honestly, in tech transfer, the first answer to almost any question is it depends. You have to sort of dig deeply into the nuances, into the facts, into the history to determine just about anything.
Gotcha. So let's say that, someone has been trying to figure out, who owns their IP. They're pretty sure it's the university, and now they need to go talk to the tech transfer office for the first time. What should someone do in preparation for that conversation, with the assumption that this is, technology they're interested in actually utilizing themselves?
Yeah, so let's start from the perspective of everyone understands that the university, well, actually, do you want me to start with the question of whether or not the university owns it, or the university owns it and now what?
Let's go with the university owns it and now what?
Perfect. So what you want to do is think about what you're going to do with the intellectual property. So particularly as a University of California employee in the tech transfer office, I am a steward of the assets of the state of California. And I like to say it that formally so people understand that we have an obligation to manage those assets properly. So that goes back to the first question. If we own it, we own it. And if we don't, we don't. And we want to start from there. But we want to understand that you have a plan for this IP. You're not just trying to say, it should have been mine, and so I want to go and do something with it. You want to come in with, I want to start a startup company, if that's what you want to do. I want to do this, I want to do that. If you know already, I think the market is going to be this, here's how I might raise funding. The more that you can show that you are a legitimate licensor for this technology, the better conversation that you're going to have. You won't know all the answers immediately, but the more that you can have business planning information set up, or how you're going to do it, or who you're going to partner with, the more the tech transfer office will take you seriously.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense from the perspective of that being a steward of the assets, for sure. So by people coming in and saying, basically, I'm the right person to get the most value out of this technology, then they'll do well. And that seems like a pretty good way to practice for talking to investors in a lot of ways too.
It is. And I love that you said that, because really in a lot of ways, the university is investing in you by trusting you and giving you a license to the technology. And that's a great way to think about it. We're one of the investors in some ways. And honestly, having the inventors involved in the commercialization of the technology is very, very valuable, whether it's through a startup or through an established company. The inventors are the ones who know the technology the best. They're the ones who can answer questions, figure out where the technology should go. There's a lot of value for having inventors involved. So they get a step up that way too.
Okay, that's great. That's great to know too. I should have mentioned this earlier also, but if anyone who is watching right now has any questions, feel free to stick them in the Q&A or the chat, and we will take a look at those closer to the end of the webinar, just so all you guys know. So basically, you've gone to your first meeting with tech transfer. Like, what are some of the next steps that might be the outcome of that meeting? Like, what's kind of the thing that you're hoping to do next, if hoping is the right word?
No, that's a great word for it. So really, what you're hoping will come out of that meeting is a discussion of what you need to do to then take next steps with the university. And when I say it that way, all the universities do things a little bit differently. And so what you want to know from them is, where do we go from here? And they might turn the question back on you and say, well, what do you want? Do you want a license? Do you want an option? What do you want? And so you want to come prepared with knowing what your current appetite for moving forward is. So this is where you start thinking about getting an attorney, because you're going to want to sign some sort of agreement with the university. You don't always need an attorney to sign a non-disclosure agreement to help you sign that, but there are people who would like throw things at me and boo and say, no, you should never sign anything without an attorney. But understanding that attorneys cost money, if it's a nice, simple, standard university non-disclosure agreement, you're probably fine. Just look at it and make sure nothing looks scary. And the idea of putting a non-disclosure agreement in place is that then all of your discussions about the business terms can be covered. by the non-disclosure agreement. Universities usually don't go and tell other people what companies are planning to do, but it's always nice to be safer that way. Another next step could be what's called a letter of intent, and different universities do it a little bit differently. At UCLA, we sign letters of intent fairly frequently. It's a very simple document where the university says, we won't license this to anyone else while we're in negotiations with you. There's usually a relatively short period of time. It can be anywhere from 3 months to 1 year, a relatively small fee, something under $1,000. And that way you're basically reserving the right for yourself to figure out whether or not you can come to some sort of agreement with the university. You might be obligated to pay for any patent costs that come up in the middle. So this is where costs start moving up. Patent costs can be very expensive, but that's basically just reserving the right to you to have a discussion. Sometimes investors want to see that before they'll invest in you. Sometimes they want to see a more complicated agreement. The more complicated agreements are options and licenses. Options also reserve rights for you, but they give you more rights. So they give you the right to start playing with a prototype, developing a prototype, doing more analysis with the IP in your company separate from what you're doing at the university. And a license is sort of your final document where you're actually getting all the rights you need to develop and sell products.
Okay. So I would
And I just wanted to say something. I mean, we could talk for hours about all of those things. So if anyone's confused, just understand there's no way to sort of shorthand what those are. I know we're going to say this at some point. If anybody ever has questions for me, you can reach me through my email address, which I think Llewellyn was going to put in the chat for you.
Yes, I believe that is in the chat for everyone right now. Yes. So I'm curious, I'm throwing one out of left field at you. I'm curious, what is kind of the time scale that you might be talking about, from that first meeting with tech transfer to, let's just say, to getting even the letter of intent? Like, is that something you're going to get at that meeting? Is that something that's going to take you a year?
It depends. So some of it depends on you, whether or not you're ready. It depends on whether or not the university is comfortable reserving it for you at that moment. So when I was at UCSB, my role at UCLA is a little bit different than what I was doing at UCSB. I would often give people who are starting up companies homework. Don't be offended, please, if a university tech transfer person says, but tell me what your product is going to look like. But tell me who your market is going to be, or how do you know that someone's actually going to want to buy the product that you're proposing to develop? Those are all questions to help validate that you're someone who can successfully commercialize the technology. So you might get homework, and then it'll take whatever time it takes for you to come back and have those further discussions. Letters of intent can be signed within a week or two. Those are relatively simple agreements. Every once in a while, someone's attorney gets really like crazy and marks those up tremendously, and then it takes longer. One piece of advice about attorneys: always make sure to get someone who is very familiar with IP transactions, and if at all possible, someone who's already negotiated with any university, or at least the university that you're negotiating with. It will help shorten the process. It'll be much cheaper for you. Don't use Uncle Mike, who's a real estate attorney. I have had that happen to me. Please don't do that. It's not the best for you. IP is complicated. It's difficult. It has nuances, and you want the best legal representation you can have, who will charge you the least that you want to, I'm sure, spend.
That sounds like great advice. Don't spend all of your money on the attorney who doesn't actually work in that field. So since we are talking about cost, here's another question that I think I might know the answer to. How much is it going to cost to actually get an actual license from the university tech transfer office?
Yeah, let's all say it together. It depends. So the things that it depends on, though, are very important to understand. One is the technology itself. Software is very different from medical devices, is very different from therapeutics and diagnostics. Each one of those will have a different life cycle and different sort of comparables in whatever industry you're licensing into, your product is going into. One of the things that we do a lot, and a lot of universities do, is try to understand what the current comparables are in the industry, so that if generally royalty rates are around 5%, we shouldn't be charging someone 10% for the same thing. But you have to make sure that it's apples to apples and not apples to oranges. And finding comparables that are the same thing is sometimes hard and sometimes very easy. If it's a cancer drug, it's a cancer drug. Although obviously for different cancers, it's different. But medical devices can be all over the map, and certainly on the physical sciences as well. But for a license, you would expect to pay something up front, something annually, a royalty rate. There's a complicated structure.
Okay, gotcha. So if a company is kind of trying to figure out how much it might cost, they can start looking at some of those things that are comparable. And I don't know if that's information that companies tend to give out freely, how much they're paying for their license.
They probably don't, but there are a lot of articles out there written about what these agreements are generally structured by. And these days, I mean, we've been doing this for more than 2 decades now. There's a lot of history and some information out there. And again, if you get an attorney who's done a lot of these, they'll be able to help you with explaining what they've seen in the past.
Okay, great. Wow. I mean, this was a lot of information. And I know when we were preparing for this, you said that this could be a conversation that could go on for a very long time. But I think that you've done a really good job of, summarizing it and picking out the really important points for people to keep in mind. I'm taking a look at the chat and the Q&A right now, and I don't see any questions at the moment. But is there anything that you would like to add, maybe resources that you know of that some people can take a look at if they're interested in this topic?
So I would say don't be afraid to start your conversation with the tech transfer office. And you can start it even before you've invented something that you want to license and move on. Always check their websites. Everybody has boot camps for entrepreneurs. There's so much training available out there, especially in the LA area. All the different incubators and accelerators offer up a lot of programming around this. Also, remember that your first conversation with any attorney is always free. So feel free to go and interview several of them to see if they're appropriate for you. Your tech transfer office might recommend some. Usually what we do is recommend someone that we know will be most efficient in terms of negotiations with us. And that doesn't mean that they're going to be pushovers and agree to everything that we say. They don't do that. The really good ones don't. But they will make sure that they're spending your dollar and your time on the things that will be most valuable for your company going forward. Did I answer your question? I feel like I was just babbling.
You definitely did.
Okay, good.
I mean, it sounds like you're saying basically use the tech transfer office as a resource in and of itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's fantastic, as well as, thanks for shouting out the incubators and accelerators in the LA area. We like to help with those things as well when we can. So yeah, I think this was a really wonderful conversation. I want to thank you very much for your time. And for everyone who is interested in learning more, Dina's information is in the chat. If you are interested in rewatching this webinar, it will be posted on LabLaunch's YouTube channel shortly after we're done here. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you, everybody.